All right. Tonight we're discussing all kinds of things. Transportation. We're going to talk about affordable housing in Atlanta. I want to dig in to the adoption bill and more. We're joined by Representative Pat Gardner, the House Minority Secretary, member of the House Transportation Committee. She is the chair of the Atlanta delegation to the Georgia General Assembly, at least the House of Representatives. It's great to have you on Lawmakers.
Well, thank you for including me today.
Absolutely. We invited Senator Brandon Beach to join us this evening as well to talk about transportation, but for some reason he got hung up and couldn't join us. Well, let's talk about the big issue here, the one the Speaker's been adamant about, this whole idea of getting the adoption bill done. He's taking this pretty personally, isn't he?
I think we're all taking it pretty personally. It's been a long time in coming. It's been 40 years since we have actually modernized the code section that deals with adoptions. And we're leaving children stranded. And I think the members of the House really worked hard on making a good, logical, clean, conservative bill. And I think what happened in the Senate at the end of the session was frankly unconscionable. I mean, they decided to bring their ideological, political opinion into managing the lives of children, and I think that's really unfortunate. And we're giving them another chance to make good on what they need to do, and I believe they'll do it in the end.
Is that the sense of it, what I was talking to Lisa Ray about just a moment? There's just some cosmetic and maybe some legal language changes, right, and no big basic change in the bill that the Senate Judiciary Committee
Committee I don't know
passed.
how extensive the changes are yet, Scott, but I do know that if they're minor enough, we can agree to those changes without a conference committee. So it'll remain to be see how, I have not seen how dramatic the changes are, but.
Okay. Let's talk about transit. We're going to talk about all kinds of things here. I got you to myself this evening. There's all kinds of great things we can discuss, but I do want to talk about transit, and we're still waiting on the House Transportation Commission recommendations, chaired by Representative Kevin Tanner.
Right.
They haven't said much. Are you hearing any clues to what they're going to recommend we do about the transit problem?
Well, the first meeting of the Joint Transportation Committees of the House and the Senate will be tomorrow at noon.
And you're on that committee.
And I am on that committee, have been, as you, I'm sure, know, a big proponent of transit for many, many years. I live in town Atlanta, and the people I represent think getting people moving around Atlanta is an absolute priority. Really exciting that the state has finally decided that it's an agenda for the entire state and particularly for the metro region. Mm-hmm. You know, the ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission, studied this for a pretty long time, and they came up with legislation about how to set up a regional transit commission probably 5 years ago. I introduced that bill, but we weren't ready yet. And MARTA has made some enormous steps forward in making the members of the General Assembly comfortable.
That's a great word to use, comfortable.
Comfortable with the management, and it's going to be very exciting to see whether we manage to the regional transit piece, mm-hmm, as well as to make the rest of Georgia accessible to each other and to us.
Is part of the magic here going to be finding a way to fund projects, coming up with a dedicated funding mechanism?
The devil's always in the details, as you know, and finding funding when much less is available from the federal government than it used to be is an issue. And Georgia has been a leader in expanding funding for fixing roads and bridges. The city of Atlanta was a leader in adding additional penny for MARTA last year, mm-hmm, and we hope some other counties in the region will make those same steps, even Gwinnett, where you live. Yeah, right. I think the need for expanding public transit and other forms of transportation, time has come. It's good for business.
Do you see a state agency that would suck up all the alphabet soup of all the small transit authorities that we have around Metro Atlanta?
I think those details are pretty devilish for people in the city of Atlanta, mm-hmm, who've been paying for MARTA for 35 years. So how does the state's control of a statewide transit system impact and give the city of Atlanta and Fulton and DeKalb County, now Clayton County, appropriate recognition for the leadership role that these two counties made, and 3 counties now.
But Clayton County couldn't wait to pay that extra penny, though. I mean, they were stranded.
Yes, and we hope that they will have really good services very soon.
And they are getting bus service,
They're
right?
getting bus services. And it's not only train. There are parts of Southwest Atlanta that need some small buses to help people get to the grocery store. I mean, it's not all about heavy trains. It's also about different kinds of buses and different kinds of availability of transit that you can get on your iPhone. I mean, the technology is definitely being changed dramatically.
Now, your district includes part of the Piedmont Park area.
It includes Piedmont Park.
And so that includes part of the Beltline.
Includes a lot of the Beltline, including all the way down in Southwest Atlanta, where Adair Park is. So yes, a lot of.
Do you see a day when the Beltline is finished that we'll have some sort of a transit loop that covers the Beltline?
Well, I've been around a while, so I know it was part of the initial discussion. But I know that my friends who've moved here recently, and I tell them that there's going to be some kind of transit on that place that they ride their bike and walk and stroll their children, and they say, oh, there's no room. I'm sorry, we can't even.
There's no room.
Right.
It's too popular.
It is. It is popular, and it's been just a wonderful addition to our city. No question about it.
Now, well, let me ask you about that, because it's so popular. Unintended consequences is that real estate values have gone through the roof. Hardly anybody can afford middle class to live next to the Beltline here. And Keisha Bottoms, the new mayor of Atlanta, has made affordable housing one of the benchmarks of her administration. How do you see that unfolding? What's the state component, and how does government avoid becoming a landlord?
Well, I think it's the issue of the moment. I think I mentioned to you, Mayor Bottoms is coming to talk to the City of Atlanta delegation on Friday. We have a subcommittee on affordable housing that's been working with the city folks. As you know, the City Council has taken some pretty dramatic steps to ensure that some of the housing on the Beltline will be affordable. And the Beltline people who intended to do more affordable housing before the bottom fell out of the market claim that they're really committed to do that too. I mentioned to you earlier, one of the very interesting developments is down at Fort Mac.
You don't hear much about Fort McPherson here lately. What's going on there?
Well, so we all know the studios there, Tyler Perry's studio.
And two MARTA stops.
And two MARTA stops, and a lot of land that is being developed by an authority that has been set up specifically to follow the guidelines of the sale from the Army, which requires some affordable housing and some housing for disability. So the land has already been purchased. Often when you're trying to create affordable housing, the issue is that the land is too expensive. So what Brian Hooker, who is the executive director of this association managing Fort Mac, says we have the affordable housing. If we can get the developers to come and work with us, we're committed to do it. In fact, they're required by the federal government as a condition of the purchase of the Fort Mac.
You chair the Atlanta delegation in the House of Representatives, but I know you've got some ideas. We need to talk about rural development, health care. Would you stay with us in a couple more minutes?
Will I talk about health care?
Yes.
Oh, you probably can get me.
Okay, all right. Stay with Representative Pat Gardner with us this evening. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up on Lawmakers, we've got a lot more to talk about in the next couple of minutes here. Priorities for this session. Stay with us.
The Georgia Chamber is committed to working with local chambers, Georgia companies, federal and state officials to help create a better state of business for Georgia. Learn more about the state's business advocacy organization at gachamber.com.
Lawmakers, made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. Over 80 years helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. The Farm Bureau legislative team is working for all Georgia farmers at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
The Georgia General Assembly has operated continuously since 1777. That's when Georgia became one of the 13 original states and revoked its status as a colony of Great Britain.
I love these factoids.
It's kind of fun. It is kind of fun. Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Scott Slade. My guest tonight is Representative Pat Gardner, Democrat from Atlanta. She chairs the Atlanta delegation to the House of Representatives. Let's talk about health care. And this seems to be one of the centers of the Rural Development Commission recommendations, as well as broadband, obviously, across the state that might even deliver more telemedicine. But I want to hear your thoughts on health care and where the state legislature ought to be going with it.
Well, obviously, we're really concerned about what's happening in the rural areas to have the advantages that we have in the metro areas. One of the concerns that I have about this long-range plan that they have for helping the rural areas, it seems to be missing a very good point. And that is, at the time, however many years ago, 7 years ago, when there was an option to expand Medicaid with 100% federal dollars that would have spent money in rural communities, hospitals, doctors. I mean, if there's a hospital and a good medical system there, it does attract business. We know that that's true. There have been several studies. In fact, there was one that published this month in Health Affairs that points out very clearly the difference between the states, mostly in the South, that did not expand Medicaid, the difference between those states and the states that expanded, and the impact on rural hospitals. It is dramatic. 85% fewer hospitals have closed in those states, rural hospitals. I'm talking about mostly, but 85% of the 85% fewer of the rural hospitals have been shut down in the states that did not expand Medicaid. Okay. And most of those states are the rural South.
The governor's big worry, obviously, was the tab that was going to have to be paid later down the road. And he didn't think the state needed to have that kind of exposure. Well,
you know, I used to have a little counter on my webpage that was the amount of money that Georgia was losing every day. It was over $8 billion, I think, when I took it off. So over these years, when we have not expanded Medicaid, my taxes have not gone down. I'm still paying those taxes, but the money is going to people in adults, poor adults who need mental health services particularly, but not to Georgians.
And people need to remember now the legislature in Georgia has the authority, not the governor, correct?
I think it's always going to be a joint authority. We did put some restrictions on, but I think it would be a joint authority. I don't think it would happen one without the other anymore.
And do you think the waiver process that we keep hearing about will take up the slack?
Well, this article I mentioned in Health Affairs is really about recommendations to the Congress as they look at maybe they're not going to repeal and replace. Maybe they're going to fix. And we know there are some serious flaws in the Affordable Care Act. So let's talk about ways we can make it better and make it work better. The waiver is what the current administration is asking for. And so Georgia has been working on waivers. Whether they'll actually be submitted is a question of the day.
Where do you think this... Go ahead.
I like the fact that Governor Deal, who's done some wonderful things in this state, except decide to expand Medicaid, but he said in his press release this morning that there's nothing lame about this duck. You know about lame ducks. And I believe he's looking at options. And a piece of that is to think about adults. Many of the adults in Georgia who need mental health services would be eligible for that Medicaid program. So people who go in and out of the doors at Grady need to be able to get managed, and they need some federal money to do that. And there are waivers to help with some of those. So I hope the governor is of a mind to make that go forward. And I believe if he decides in a limited way to propose some waivers that the legislature would go along, though.
How would that dovetail into your bill, HB 607, the Psychiatric Advance Directive Act? Or would it?
Well, it was a bill that was proposed by the advocates for mental illness so that they would have more control over their own treatment. Sometimes when they are, they have a time when they're taking their medication, everything's stabilized, then they have a chronic event. Suddenly, they're out of control. They're either going to jail or they're getting thrown into a hospital that they don't want to be in. There are options. If they have an adequate treatment plan, which is what the advance directive is, the person who picks them up would have access to who to call, what medicine they're taking, what hospital they work at. It's a complicated issue, but we believe that patients have the ability to plan for themselves in the future, even those with serious mental illness.
And that might even dovetail into what was been a concern with law enforcement as well, dealing with the mentally ill, to have that channel open.
The law enforcement agencies are doing a good job of training people to deal with the people who are in their psychotic or out of control state. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more to do, but imagine if they had somebody, well, this is my agent, or this is my husband. Could you call him before you take me to the jail? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be a nice idea?
And here's an urban Atlanta representative with a bill that would restrict off-road vehicles for being on roadways.
That came from the city of Atlanta. There was a problem, and there is a problem from the city of Atlanta.
Some of those videos are pretty wild.
Well,
see those guys.
And actually, the legislators from other parts of the state would be in Atlanta downtown and be horrified by what they saw. But it is pretty hard to restrict off-road vehicles when you have hunting land where you use an ATV regularly, and you don't really...
They're meant for Peachtree Street.
They are not meant, and they're illegal on Peachtree Street. Yeah.
Thank you for spending this time with us. Please don't be a stranger.
I'll be back.
All right, Pat Gardner with us this evening, representative from Atlanta. Great to have you with us tonight on Lawmakers. And as always, you can track us on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News. Use hashtag GPB Lawmakers to join the conversation. And check out our website, gpb.org/lawmakers, where you can find full episodes of our show, watch the House and Senate live, and get behind-the-scenes videos. For more great political coverage, don't miss our GPB radio show, Political Rewind, hosted by Bill Nigut, live on Mondays and Wednesdays at 2 and Fridays at 3. Thanks for joining us tonight, and tomorrow tune in for the Governor's State of the State address. We'll be right back here live at 7 p.m. with everything you need to know. It's Lawmakers. Thanks for joining us.